والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين. Jazakallah khairan, and thank you for attending the third webinar. So this is the last one out of the three for the wellbeing seminars. Those of you that missed diet and exercise, I'm sure it's available on 3Memes social media feeds if you want to refer to it. But we'll crack on with mental health. So just remember, everybody, this is an overview. It's just a general gist of things. And before you make any changes to anything, please consult with your doctor, with your GP. In particular, if there may be any issues with your current medical problems, medication, and so forth. Like the other two, I'd love to give personal advice, but without medical records, it would be really difficult for me to do so. So my apologies in advance. So this one is, so we've done diet, we've done exercise, this is mental health. Just remember, everything's interlinked. You cannot deem one independent of the other if you and I wish to achieve optimum health. So do refer to the diet and exercise one, as well as obviously listening into this one, because they're all interlinked. So why are we talking about it? Well, 30% of Asians in this country report symptoms of anxiety. So that's 1 in 3 of us. Just over 10% of men and a quarter of 24%, so a quarter of women, 1 in 4 suffer from common mental health illnesses, which are the big two are depression and anxiety. Just over 10% of Asians, men and women, suffer from suicidal thoughts, which is real tragedy. Allah give everybody shifa, inshallah. Anyone who's suffering from this is horrible to be in that state. And there's also a massive stigma attached to mental health in our communities, as if we're not allowed to have emotion. And generally we do, as a community, we suffer from chronic stress, just a state of being chronically stressed. And when I deliver this, I always get a laugh with this one when I ask, do you know an Asian who's not stressed? Very few people will say, yeah, I do know people, Asians who aren't. Generally, we're all stressed, aren't we? So remember, we're going to be solution focused like the other two, because prevention is better than cure. It's better that you and I do not slip into depression or anxiety or the mental health issues. But also those who unfortunately are suffering from depression and anxiety, hopefully, inshallah, this seminar will give you some tips, motivation, inspiration to make small changes, which will have massive impact, inshallah. And it's not about a quick fix. It's about long-term sustainable changes. So when it comes to your health, whether it's if you want to lose weight, if you want to improve your fitness, if you want to reach a state of cure with an illness, whether it's physical or mental, you have to play the long game. There's going to be no quick fix with most things. So remember, this is about playing the long game. Okay. Remember that there's plenty of people who come to see us in our surgeries quite content and happy with giving pills as the solution. Very few want to really help themselves with getting them into optimal health through lifestyle changes. But this is a classic opportunity now, taking into account the other two seminars that we did. So that's the goal. That's the idea with these seminars. Anything is possible, and we see this a lot. The phrase "I can't change," or "It's impossible to bring change," or "It's impossible to break through." It's not. It is possible. It's absolutely possible, and that's the mindset that we're setting. That's the scene that we're setting with these webinars. That if you are in that mindset, just know we've seen people turn their lives around with it when it comes to physical or mental health problems. It is absolutely possible to make changes. And change is a process, it's not an event. So the analogy that I give is that if a human being doesn't brush their teeth as they should, and they see their dentist only twice a year, what would happen to their teeth? The teeth will fall out. But someone who brushes their teeth for 2 minutes, twice a day, every day, sees their hygienist twice a year and their dentist twice a year, they're going to have glowing teeth. So it's a process, a constant process. It's not a magical event that will, you know, bring change. So you have to play the long game when it comes to this. And this is where we've been going with the diet, exercise, and the same notion with mental health. So let's look at the scope of the problem. So 1 in 4, and this is across the UK now, regardless of race, 1 in 4 experience a mental health problem. That's a lot. Okay, so this is a real problem. 1 in 5 of our children live with a parent who has a mental health problem. So it impacts our family. So it will impact the spouse, it will impact the children, it impacts the whole family unit. And since 2006, prescribing of antidepressants or anti-anxiolytics, medication that controls anxiety, has increased by over 100%. And that goes back to the slide that I showed earlier, that there's plenty of people who are quite happy to rely on medication, or there's this expectation that medication will solve their problems. I want to make a point here, that's not their fault, because as doctors, including myself, that's the narrative that we've given. In that when a patient comes to see us and they have symptoms of anxiety and depression, usually, most of the time, the doctor will give them an antidepressant or an anti-anxiolytic, and almost sell it to them that this will solve your problem. So it's not the patient's fault at all. It's just the narrative that's there. But the point of this slide is that it's astronomical, the number of antidepressants and anxiolytics that have been prescribed over the past 15 plus years. In terms of with Asians, depression is really common. It's 3 in 100 of generalized depression, generalized anxiety, 6 in 100 phobia, 2 in 100 OCD, so that's obsessive compulsive disorder, 1 in 100 PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, 4 in 100, mixture of anxiety and depression, about 8 in 100. That's when they have both of them together. Personality disorder is 2 in 100. So actually quite common things, in our community. What's our biggest hurdle, however? And it is, and we have to have ultra adult conversations. Okay, so if I offend anybody, that's not my intention. I just want you to think, maybe think differently about this. It's really important that we think anew. So one of the biggest hurdles is stigma. So there was a study done a couple of years ago, mainly in London, looking at why Asians in particular do not reach out and seek help to address their mental health problems, such as depression, anxiety, for example. And the conclusion of this study was what you can see on the slides, that there's a massive hurdle of shame, shut-up, which ultimately results in living in a state of fear and secrecy. And this is what like I said earlier, it's as if we're not allowed to have emotions. It's just not unacceptable to have emotions in our community. The causes of mental health are really misunderstood. It's very common, and look, we don't deny this because it is part of our tradition, but unfortunately it's ever so common for it to be put down to black magic or jinn, or someone casting the evil eye, which is possible. It is possible, but surely the vast majority of cases will not be because of that. The third thing that they found was that there's a social pressure to conform. Like I said, you're not allowed to have emotion. Statements like from the elder generation, in our community, to quote unquote just get on with it. They'll quote, I had this problem, that problem, and we just had to get on with it. That sort of narrative notions, they don't work. And so there's an actual pressure to just conform. People with mental health problems aren't valued. Unfortunately, they're ridiculed in our community. They're almost cast out as if they're something else. And also, this is a reality. Marriage prospects can be damaged if somebody finds out that such and such has depression or anxiety. If people find out, likelihood is that they won't want to marry me, which is a reality, which is an absolute reality. So these are the top 5 issues that came out of this study. And essentially, what we do subconsciously is that we exclude, without realizing, we exclude this group within our community who suffer from mental health problems from us, from the community, subconsciously. We don't realize, but they do. They can pick up on things. And unfortunately, despite the intense prohibition with regards to backbiting and slandering and gossiping in our tradition of Islam, this is a big problem, a massive problem. We talked about it last time, how Allah detests, this is a prophetic tradition, Allah detests for us to gossip, slander, backbite, etc. And we just can't get away from it, whether it's face-to-face, on social media and so forth. It's just an unfortunate truth, and it really needs to stop, because like I said, subconsciously they'll pick up on how you behave around that person once you know that they might have a mental health problem or they have a mental health problem. So this is something that really needs to be capped, nipped in the bud, if we want to help ourselves and others around us who are suffering from depression and anxiety. And therefore, ultimately, there's a reluctance to actually seek help. And there are people in our communities who are drowning. They're drowning in their tears, and we need to open doors for them, not close doors for them. Because what happens is that these individuals, it's just easier to put on a face, a mask. You can get through life by putting lots of filters on your Facebook page, Instagram, social media, whatever. Loads of filters to actually give a message to the world that you're on top of the world, but actually you're drowning inside. Because sometimes it's just easier to be that way, because there's an expectation that we have to be super happy, super busy, super intelligent, super successful, super rich, all the time, which is the current expectation. So the key messages from this study that mental health problems are common. Okay, they're common. People can and do recover. Okay, so it's not a death wish. I think that's what I'm trying to say, that people, and this study is trying to say, people can and do recover. It's not that they have someone has depression, that's it, they're never going to get better. That's nonsense. Okay, people can change if they seek help, and they seek the right avenues of help. Okay, that's key. They seek help, they seek the right avenues of help, and also the seeking of help has to come from within. And absolutely anybody can be affected, regardless of race, gender, culture, religion. It's perfectly normal. That's the key message. In other words, we need to create a sense of just as we accept that heart disease is there, cancer is there, diabetes is a problem. Okay, we need to accept and embrace mental health as an illness. That's the key message. And for what I want to say is, it most definitely is not, in capitals, a sign of weak iman. So it's not. We shouldn't be having this sort of a conversation with somebody who is suffering from depression and anxiety, saying that you have weak iman. That's not the case at all. It's absolutely fine to have emotions, and it's absolutely fine to talk about your emotions if you're feeling like you're struggling. Why? Well, if you look at the who is our benchmark, is our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If you look at the books of Sirah, of his biography, when the Prophet ﷺ and the community in Mecca at that time, they were expelled into a valley known as the Valley of Abu Talib for 3 years, because they were boycotted by the tribes of Mecca at that time. And for 3 years they had to stay in a valley, and no one was allowed to buy and sell. No one was allowed to marry into the group of Muslims who were there. No one was allowed to have a meaningful conversation with them. And they went through 3 years of being boycotted, starvation, illness, all sorts. In fact, those 3 years, scholars say that actually contributed to the death of his beloved wife Khadija radiallahu anha, because she died the year following the end of the boycott. Now, she passed away. Then Abu Talib passed away, who was the Prophet ﷺ's guardian at that time. He gave him a lot of support when he was faced with turbulence from the Meccan tribes. What was that year called? Now, you'll all see it in the books. It's called Amul Huzn, the year of sadness. What does that tell you? That our Prophet ﷺ had emotions, and it was okay to have emotions. And that actual year was called Amul Huzn, the year of sadness, because of what he went through. There's also a verse in the Quran where Allah says to the Prophet ﷺ, and when Abu Bakr radiallahu anh and Prophet ﷺ were in the cave when they were emigrating from Mecca to Medina, and they had to hide, the Abu Bakr radiallahu anh became a bit agitated because someone was near the cave where they were hiding, and the Prophet ﷺ, the actual verse was it actually mentions it in the verse, but the Prophet ﷺ said, "La tahsan, don't be sad, don't grieve. Inna Allah ma'ana, Allah is with us." In other words, what I'm trying to say to you is that we have enough proof in our tradition that it's okay to have emotions, and it's okay to have feelings, and it's okay to actually talk about them. So let's make a start, and let's focus on. I hope that I know I went on and on about it, but I think it's really important to discuss these issues as a starting point, because these things need to be, these barriers and hurdles need to be broken, quite frankly. So let's look at depression and anxiety. So those of you that you can see a little bird who's just getting pelted with hail and snow, and it's cold and it's miserable and there's nowhere to go. And I want you to imagine that if somebody is having, if you were this bird, how would you feel? Within no time, you'd start feeling a little bit sad. And if you were there for a long time, you'd feel really depressed. And so this picture, I want you to imagine in your mind's eye that some of our, some of our brothers and sisters from our community, and any human being, sometimes life throws things at them which is really, really difficult, and it results in a state of being sad, low, depressed, and so forth. And it's therefore it's understandable, and get on with it is not the best of responses. Okay, therefore it's understandable that if life throws things at you, you can feel not so good psychologically. So depression is a low mood that lasts for a long time, okay? Long time. And you're talking, a good 6 weeks minimum, okay? 6 to 8 weeks. And this is the key, that's why I've underlined this and put it in bold, and it affects your everyday life. The key here is that not only do you feel low in mood and other things which I'll come to, it impacts your functional ability. You can't do the things that you normally could do with your eyes closed. Think work, I can't function in work, or I'm struggling to do day-to-day stuff in my house. Some people, they can't even get out of bed when they're really, really on the severe spectrum. And it's very different to just being low in mood, which you can just shake off, with a run or having a conversation with someone to calibrate your mind. It's a persistent state of this low mood with other symptoms that I'll talk about, but the primary symptom is low mood, and it impacts your functional ability, your ability to do normal day-to-day things. So common symptoms in no particular order. I'll let you have a look at it for yourself, but these are the symptoms that one can have as well as low mood in terms of depression. And key ones are things like no pleasure in activities, feeling really hopeless, worthless, thoughts of death or suicide or self-harm, lack of appetite. They're the key ones here. So it's a spectrum of symptoms, not just low mood. On the severe spectrum, patients can experience thoughts of self-harm and suicide. We ask Allah for afiyat and salamat with this. Allah protect anybody who's afflicted with this. And also thoughts about acting on intentions or thoughts on acting on these thoughts of self-harm and suicide, or complete loss of function. Literally, like we have seen patients who cannot get out of their bed. They cannot move. They've just lost all function. They can't brush their teeth. They can't even get themselves to have a glass of milk to drink. They complete loss of function. And some on the severe spectrum do experience psychotic symptoms such as hallucinations, so hearing things or seeing things, or having delusional thoughts or paranoid thoughts, and that's on the severe spectrum. In terms of depression. Let's look at anxiety. There's different types. There's generalized, which is just a general state of anxiety with everything, day-to-day things. There's specific, which is social anxiety. So specific social situations can make a human being feel anxious, or going to certain places, or with certain people. Panic disorder is defined as no actual clear cause or trigger for the panic. It's just random panic attacks with no clear cause or even trigger. Phobias, so an extreme fear with a specific trigger. Post-traumatic stress disorder is usually after, well, it's after a traumatic event. And then you have the symptoms of either depression or anxiety or both. Obsessive compulsive disorder is repetitive thoughts or behavior or urges to do, repetitive things. And that's a very specific type of anxiety. What we're seeing now, especially over the past at least 10 years, because of the internet and how readily information is, and actually it's got worse with coronavirus, unfortunately, is health anxiety. This obsession or compulsion relating to illnesses, or people who research their symptoms incessantly and checking to see if they have specific types of symptoms, or a general anxiety that they've got, quote unquote, something wrong with them, and then they develop a health anxiety. On this point, I want to make a point here that to anybody who's listening, just be careful with WhatsApp or social media. So only this week, one of the brothers contacted me about his mother. That she's absolutely fine. She's in her 60s, absolutely fine. And then since the coronavirus, she's developed, unfortunately, quite severe anxiety, and then has dipped into depression over the coronavirus. And unfortunately, we're all attached to certain groups, WhatsApp groups and so forth. And unfortunately, there are people on these groups who don't think about what they're sending and who they're sending it to. And you have to be really careful, really, really careful, because through the feeds that this lady was getting about coronavirus, who knows if it's true information, factual or not, she's developed this health anxiety. And so you've got to be super careful. Look to see who's on. Well, actually, don't even send anything. It's just not helpful. And if you are going to, because you're trigger happy and you just have to forward everything because God knows why. But if you are, a person who's like that, who has to forward everything, just have a think, who's on this group? How could it possibly affect them? And then decide whether to send it or not. Because this could have been avoided if people just thought before they sent things. And body dysmorphia related to your physical appearance is anxiety that I don't look good, or I'm too fat, or whatever. And again, this is linked to modern day popular culture, in that you're supposed to look beautiful all the time, and the young are really, really afflicted by this specific type of anxiety. So they're the general common ones that we're seeing. Interestingly, with anxiety, it feels different from person to person, and as opposed to depression. Depression, you kind of patients have this similar type of feeling, and there's a plethora of symptoms ranging from anxious feelings, thoughts, and behavior. So again, take a look at this. These are common symptoms of anxiety, and as you can see, it's lots of them. So you can either have one, or you can have all of them. And looking at them, look how. This is it's really it's real, and it must be hard if anybody who's suffering with anxiety with these, because they experience a lot of physical symptoms that come with it. We move on. You can also have both. You can also have depression and anxiety. So they do overlap. They do overlap in terms of symptomology. So it can be anxiety and then that leads to depression, or depression and then leads to anxiety, and then it's diagnosed as anxiety with depression. Notice the with. So what causes it? Okay, so 7 most common causes of depression in no particular order. Traumatic events can cause depression if somebody's experienced anything traumatic or witnessed something traumatic. Stress is a massive cause. Stress starts off as just stress. Give it 4 to 6 weeks. If it's not dealt with or calibrated, it then slips into depression. Poor nutrition can cause depression. I'll come to nutrition later on, inshallah. Sometimes there can be a chemistry imbalance in the brain by virtue of lots of things such as drugs, genetics, or even nutrition or stress and traumatic events. Drugs, alcohol, they can cause depression, just how they modify the brain chemistry. When it comes to genetics, there's only 5% of depression and anxiety cases are actually linked to genetics. Unfortunately, again, this is another thing in our community. We just flippantly say that it's genetics because such and such, his mother or father or aunt or uncle has a diagnosis of depression, anxiety. It runs in the family, quote unquote. That's definitely not the case. Only 5% is because of genetics. And then physical health problems. So if somebody has a chronic disease, or if somebody has been given a diagnosis which is, a tragic diagnosis like cancer where it's palliative, there's not much the doctor can do. Of course, people will fall into a depressive state. If somebody has a severe arthritis and they can't do the things that they want to do, they lose their self-worth, they lose their confidence, and they can slip into depression. So these are the 7 common causes of depression. What about anxiety? So again, genetics is there, definitely not at the top. It's only about 5%. It can be because of a learned behavior. One can program their brain to to behave in a certain way, and let me give you an example. Okay, when I was 15, 16 years old, I was run over by a car while I was on my bike, and so when fast forward 20 odd years, when my son started riding his bike, I was ridiculously anxious about him going on the road because of that experience. But if I didn't calibrate, I'd make my son anxious on the road because he's seen his father being anxious on the road. And what do children do? They normalize their behavior based on their parents' behavior. So alhamdulillah, I calibrated, and he's fine. But potentially it could have been a learned behavior from dad of being anxious on the road. Certain health issues, like if you've been given a diagnosis and you're quite uncertain about if a human being has been given a diagnosis and there's uncertainty about the future, of course it will cause anxiety. Of course it will. Abuse absolutely does. Okay, domestic abuse or child abuse. I know these are really sensitive topics, but they can result in a state of anxiety because you've lost the patient has lost their sense of security. Or it could just be your personality, that you're just genuinely shy and you just need to crack the shell, come out from your shell and really calibrate. But it can be a personality trait, and it's okay if somebody's like that. You just got to help them with love. The most important thing is that if anybody who's listening now, or somebody who is struggling with depression, anxiety in particular, or any mental health problem, is because of the things that I've mentioned, the stigma, the shutdown, and then the ultimate reluctance to seek help, is seek help, because there's lots of stuff out there to help you. And this is the key. One of the key messages is seek help. Okay, how can you seek help? So the obvious thing to do is acknowledge it first. Acknowledge that actually I may have some of this resonates with me. I may have a mental health problem. I might have depression, anxiety, or whatever. So the first thing to do is to acknowledge it. Until one acknowledges that they have a problem, it's really difficult to actually receive help and then benefit from the help that's given. It has to come from within. It has to come from within. And see your GP. So however things are being done now with your local GP during coronavirus, about 95% of GPs across the country are consulting remotely. That's fine. You can do it by telephone or video or whatever suits you, and seek out therapy. If you are on the severe spectrum, or somebody that's on the severe spectrum, you must go, or you must take that person to the GP. If there's suicidal ideation, if there's complete loss of function, if there's psychotic symptoms, they need to go to their GP, because at that point they may well need medication. I'm not discounting medication. It does help and does work in the higher, moderate, stroke, severe symptoms of depression and anxiety. So do seek out medication from your GP if you or somebody else who's on the severe spectrum. If you're not, or even if you are, you can seek out therapy through your GP or even via yourself. You can do it yourself. So if you just Google Trafford, so if you live in Trafford, wherever you live, actually, just Google your district or borough, and then next to it, in capitals, IAPT, Improving Access for Psychological Therapies. This is a national thing. You can self-refer online or ring or email, because they want to make this, IAPT is what it stands for, IAPT, IAPT, Improving Access to Psychological Therapies. Because they know that if there's improvement in terms of access and a patient can self-refer, they're going to get more people referred into the system, and they can therefore help. So do take a look and refer yourself. Currently, the waiting times are actually less than usual because they're not doing any face-to-face because of the coronavirus. So they're doing it all either video or telephone. So take advantage if you are in that boat. But the key thing here in terms of recovery, and I've mentioned this with diet, and I've mentioned this with exercise, it starts with you. No one can help you apart from you. So we can give you guidance, we can give you advice, we can signpost you, we can even give you medication, but nothing will change until and unless it starts from you within. You have the absolute power to change the situation from within, and it's absolutely possible. So remember the first few slides, impossible. It's absolutely possible, and it starts with you. Why? We've seen many people have breakthrough, completely turn things around, and that's proof that it's possible. So how does it start? Firstly, what's important is to just hit the pause button and say, I'm going to reset. I'm going to hit the pause button from today or from now. I'm going to cut it off. My life is not going to be like this anymore if you're struggling with mental health issues. And I'm going to reset. So pause, make a decision. My life is not going to be like this anymore. Things are going to change. Okay, I've made that decision. And then reset. How do you reset? So remember, I know I'm going on and on about this, but it's ridiculously important. We cannot deem diet and exercise as independent to this. As simple as it sounds, you have to have a super rich diet. So there's a study called the SMILE study. Google it. They studied patients who were on the moderate spectrum of depression, and they put them on a Mediterranean diet. So we talked about this in diet in terms of anyone with heart disease. Mediterranean diet is a really good diet. It's a good diet anyway for anybody really. So they put them on a modified Mediterranean diet, and then they assessed them at 3 months, and they found that those who were on a diet actually more of the cohort who just went on a diet and didn't take any medication actually recovered from depression and had longer bouts of being well and not relapsing compared to the group who didn't change their diet and just went on medication. You can remember from the exercise webinar that we did, the book Spark. I hope somebody got a hold of it, but if you read it, it talks about the biochemical, how exercise can radically modify and calibrate all the hormones, endorphins in your brain when it comes to depression and anxiety. You can run off anxiety and you can run off depression. Take a look at that book, Spark, okay? Yeah, but the point is, it's not independent. So this is how it starts, in that you have to reset your diet and exercise regime and look after yourself. And how do you look after yourself? You have compassion on yourself. If you love someone, you will make sure that they eat well, they eat healthy, they sleep well. You know, they have plenty of time for joy, leisure, pleasure, and so forth. But you've got to start doing that with yourself. You've got to have compassion on yourself, just like you have compassion on everybody else. Have compassion on yourself. And then how do you have compassion on yourself? You simply take it easy with yourself. Really, take it super easy with yourself in everything that you do. And that's the starting point, okay? So this is hard for me to talk about because I know that there's cultural baggage that comes with this, and there's religiously, we have to be careful here. But what I do want to say is that there are certain people and there are certain things in our life that are simply toxic, and you and I know it, that there are certain people in our lives and there are certain things that we involve ourselves in which is toxic and not helpful to our mental state, okay? Whether it's, you know, someone that you know and you just can't get away from them, or on social media or WhatsApp or whatnot. What I want you to think about is whatever is toxic in terms of people or things or whatever, you want to think about cutting it out from your life, okay? Really, in the best of ways, in the most beautiful, prophetic of ways. Because remember, and I'm mentioning the word prophetic on purpose, there are, you know, if it comes to family or neighbors, there's rules involved in our religion. You can't just cut these people off. But what I suggest is that if there is somebody who is blood relative or really close to you that has rights over you, like a neighbor or a relative or in-laws, etc., etc., what's really, really important is, and I don't want this to come across that I'm breaking families. I'm not at all. What I want you to do is go to a scholar, a learned scholar of religion. Go to him or her and be open and take their advice on how to handle it, because there's certain people we can't cut off completely. We have to learn how to deal with them in the most beautiful of ways. But just have a think about what's toxic for you and how to set healthy boundaries between you and whoever is toxic around you, or whatever is toxic. Like, for example, we talked about WhatsApp, that old lady who developed, just get off WhatsApp, get off social media if it's not good for you. Stop watching the news, for example, because there's nothing good in the news these days. You can also help yourself by looking at some of these websites. So all these websites, they're very famous across the country. You can access a lot of resources for self-help, basically. Take a look, lots to talk about. My time will go over if I go through each one, but do take a look at them and navigate through the websites. They're really, really good resources in order to help yourself. Okay, so what do you see? Do you see a duck or a bunny popping its head out? Okay, can you see both? Why have I put this slide on? Okay, what can you see? What's your attention? And sometimes we can have selective attention. So pay attention to this. What selective attention? Okay, have you heard of the phrase "seek and you will find"? Very, very famous phrase. Okay, so sometimes, like, imagine you've bought a new car, and what you'll notice is that for the first 2-3 weeks, everybody on the road is driving the same car as you. That's not the case. Okay, that's not the case at all. But it's come to your attention to notice the same car that you've bought, and that's called selective attention. So sometimes, if we're not in a good place, we selectively pay attention to things that confirm that life isn't good, or he or she hates me, or everything's always wrong, and so forth. We can enter that state of selective attention to confirm our notions, when actually around us, there's so much more that will actually confirm the opposite. And this is where I'm going with this, is CBT. In terms of helping yourself, you can calibrate your mind by going through the process of CBT with a therapist. And essentially what CBT stands for is cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognition is the way we think, and there's a reason why we think. It's because of childhood experiences, adult experiences, life experiences, in a nutshell. Behavior is we behave directly because of our thoughts and emotions. That's what influences our behavior. And the therapy is to reset it into a way that works for you, because everybody thinks differently. But essentially, we have a thought process. And remember, how we think affects how we feel and act. So it will affect our emotions, and how we feel affects how we think and act. And then that affects your behavior, and what we do affects how we think and feel. And the cycle goes on and on and on. So just imagine a scenario where, let me give you a hypothetical scenario. So I'm giving this talk right now. Imagine my son walks in. He's always got a ball in his hand, and he decides to just throw the ball, and it lands on his laptop and everything. I call out of this Zoom call. So my first thought process, if I'm not well controlled in terms of my own emotional regulation, my thought process would be, "Oh my God, what are you doing? Are you this, that, and the other?" And I'm going to be going a bit crazy, right? And my emotions will be anger primarily, and then my behavior, I could really shout at him, or throw him out of the room, and so forth. And then obviously I'm going to feel bad. I'm going to feel really, really bad about what I just did. That'll make me feel sad. And then I could slip into, "Oh my God, I'm useless. I'm a horrible dad," and so forth. And that cycle could go on and on and on. And this is what we're trying to get with CBT, that it can change perceptions. Actually, it changes. Well, let's give another perception to that thought process that you're having. Let's give another perception to the emotions that you're having. Let's calibrate your emotions, and then also let's calibrate your behavior. Because remember, behavior is directly related to your emotions and your thoughts, and they're all interlinked. And what happens when you have CBT is that therapists will actually analyze if the patient has any what's called unhelpful thinking styles. So we all do this, okay? We all have this black and white thinking, all or nothing thinking. If I'm not perfect, I failed, or it's either right or wrong, or all or nothing for me. We all have overgeneralization. Everything is always rubbish. Nothing is ever good in my life. We all do it, okay? We all have these mental filters. This is selective attention. We only pay attention to certain types of things that confirm our notions. For example, when you notice failures, but you don't see success, you're going to define yourself as a failure. That leads on to disqualifying the positive, or jumping to conclusions, mind reading, or fortune predicting the future when it's not even happened. Catastrophizing the situation, blowing out of proportion, making a mountain out of a molehill. Emotional reasoning. So because I feel a certain way, therefore it must be. So I feel embarrassed, so I must be an idiot. Okay, that sort of notion. Should have, must, could have, all these words that we use to be, being hard on ourselves, or labeling ourselves as I'm stupid, or I'm useless, I'm an idiot, I'm a loser, or personalization, that, you know, blaming yourself or taking responsibility for something that's got nothing to do with you. So these are the common unhelpful thinking styles, and the therapist, what he or she will do is just calibrate and bring you back to a middle way, basically. If you're going to take anything from that unhelpful thinking styles, just remember, feelings are not facts. Okay, feelings are not facts, and your mental illness is lying to you if you are feeling like that. Just remember that. Pin that up on your wall if it's helpful. So that's one way of doing it. Okay, that's the conventional way, but there's other ways. Okay, there's many other ways that you can help yourself. So I'm just going to run through, because I'm conscious of time. I'm just going to run through a couple of things that have helped over the years with my patients. So essentially, first, think about changing your story. Everybody has a story. Everybody has this, you know, oh, my life's always like this. Oh, it's always terrible. Oh, I'm always a failure. You know, that sort of thing. Have you met people who are permanently happy? That's their story. Have you met people who are permanently angry? That's their story. You know, that if they, even if they don't, you know, even if there's nothing to be angry about, they'll find something to be angry about. That's their story. Okay. Have you met someone who just moans all the time? That's their story. But what you want to think about is that if that resonates with you, the good news is that you can change your story at any point in your life if you are like that. And when you change your story, you essentially change your life. Allah's given you a choice in anything that you do. Allah's given you and I a choice, and you can change at any point. You change your story, you'll change your life forever. Essentially, what I'm talking about here is realigning our focus, because a lot of the time we focus on things that actually have, you know, that they just don't mean anything. They don't matter. We focus on things that don't matter when we should be focusing on actually what matters. So what actually matters? Okay, this is called the wheel of life. So in no particular order, what I want you to do is take a look at this, or take a picture, or just Google it. The 0 in the middle is if you are not, if you're not moving towards, you know, making things meaningful in certain areas. And then you'll see percentage signs. So you ask yourself, where am I with regards to my career in terms of percentage? How much effort do I put in? How much focus do I give? And how much do I actually care about it? And the same for everything. And then you go around in each one. And essentially you want to ask yourself, if I'm 100% here, why? And can I use those skills to get 100% there? So essentially these things are the only things that matter in our life. And in no particular order, your health. Health is wealth. Health is everything. If you've got, you know, if you've got health, you have absolutely everything. Because so just ask yourself, how much focus and time and effort do I give to my health, my wellness, and my strength, and my vitality, my well-being? What about your relationships with people? Remember, the most experts in psychology, what they say, the beautiful phrase that I heard, one of them said, relationships is, especially with spouse, is where the most juice in life comes from. And it's where the most pain in life comes from for most people. So ask yourself, when it comes to relationships, what's your relationship like with friends and family? And if it's towards, you know, the 0, you have to work out, how can I get it to 80, 90%? Okay. What about your life partner, your spouse? You know, you have to give that time. You have to, you know, you have to get, it's a human need to have a wonderful relationship with a lifelong partner. You have to work out what's going wrong here and how can I fix it? How can I be solution focused? What about relationship with yourself? Like I said before, have you got compassion with yourself? And if you haven't, how can you develop that? What about wealth? And it's not about having tons of money. Not at all. It's about having enough and being content and happy. Just remember, you know, that unfortunately, marketing, it will make you feel miserable, ugly, worthless. You know, you even though you bought a new car, looking at a new billboard, you want to buy a new one after a week of having a brand new car. It's not about having more. It's about having enough in terms of what you need, not what you want, and being content. What about your career and growth in terms of learning or having a meaningful career, something that actually brings joy to you and joy to other people? What about contribution? Okay, how are you contributing to somebody's life? These things actually bring a lot of well-being. And you know, this is acknowledged from people who are not people of you know, who aren't Muslim, that there's people who, you know, there's a need to have spiritual guidance and a connection. So ask yourself, where am I with Allah and the Prophet ﷺ's sunnah? You know, where am I? If I'm down towards the 0, how can I get back up again? And the most important 2 things out of all of these, in my opinion, most important 2 is your spiritual connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then relationships. They're the ones which I've found the most where if people deal with these two things, and the third will be health. Okay, most of them are fine. So just have a think about this, and it all takes about having what's called growth mindset against a fixed mindset. People who have a growth mindset, they're constantly, they understand that I'm on a journey here. My life is a journey, and there's going to be ups and downs, and constantly I'm growing. That if I have a setback, it's sent to guide me in a bigger and better way, as opposed to the fixed mindset, which is completely negative all the time. But the good news is it's like a switch. Once you enter that zone of growth mindset and you hit that switch, it's a completely different ball game. And you can hit that switch at any point in your life, no problem whatsoever. It just has to come from within. Just take a look at some of these books, which I found really, really, really interesting, and it changed my practice in terms of, just chucking pills at patients. Take a look at Healing Without Freud or Prozac. This is David Servan Schreiber. He's actually an ex-Harvard consultant psychiatrist, and he talks about his story and how he went down the natural route as opposed to just prescribing pills. It's really interesting. But here, the summary is, obviously, he talks about diet, lifestyle, exercise, and sleep a lot, which is really important, which is why I've been going on about it a lot. But he also talks about three things that if a human being hasn't addressed three things in their life, it's going to be really hard to tackle depression, anxiety, or most mental health issues. And in no particular order, he explains that if someone has had trauma, it's really important to deal with that trauma with specialist input. Really important. He also, and in a non-religious way, he actually talks about a human being needs to have a sense of purpose. Why am I here? What's my role? What's my goal here in being on this planet? And you have to find that purpose of why you're here. He's not even talking in a religious sense. And then the third thing he says is love. He says a human being has an innate need to be unconditionally loved by certain groups of people. So these are three things that he recommends to addressing. Then there's Spark, which we talked about last time, where it talks about the science behind the benefits of exercise on mental health. So just take a look. It's a wonderful book that I refer to with patients as well. Take a look at the Inside Out Revolution, that human experiences unfolds from inside out, not the other way as it may appear. Essentially, if you want to remember this, some experts, they say that, look, in life, it's the decisions you make, not the conditions you meet. It's the decisions you make, not the conditions you meet. So why is it that there's people who have been given a really traumatic diagnosis and they've turned everything around? Because they made a decision at that point that, okay, I'm facing a really, really difficult illness, but they've made a choice to be solution focused and work a plan of how they're going to get through this. People who have been bankrupt, sleeping on the street, and then made, it wasn't the conditions that they were in. They made decisions to, okay, this is what I'm going to do about it, and that's what this talks about. So take a look, because it will really help you rethink if you are struggling. This is really big in sports psychology. So Prof. Steve Peters, he actually was the psychiatrist for the Britain's Olympic cycling team. In my opinion, when I studied this, it can be used for life. Very, very similar concept in terms of how you control your nafs, how you keep it under control. But it's well worth reading in terms of how you tame your chimp. And essentially what it talks about is that the emotional brain is a lot faster than the rational brain. So how do you home in your emotional brain so that you're more rational than emotional? Affluenza is a really, really good read. Okay, I tell everybody to read this book. Wonderful insight into modern day problems, and it goes back to that notion that there's a constant. You can't get away from it. That you see, nothing's ever good enough. You don't look good enough, or your car isn't good enough, or your house isn't big enough, or your kitchen needs replacing. You can potentially make yourself feel worthless by following the narrative of you need to have more. But it's a really good book, especially if you want to understand the importance and the concept of zuhud, of doing without, which is actually really big in our religion. That minimalism is really big in our religion. Look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ. He was a minimalist. He had no concern for this world whatsoever, and he was super happy. This book, I think, is a must if you want to understand emotions, so where they stem from, and his argument, Oliver James is a brilliant psychologist. His argument is that it stems from childhood. But he also talks about how to generally lead a fulfilled life. Very small book, easy to read. I recommend this to everybody. Other books, you've seen this one from the previous two, the South Asian Health Solution. Dr. Sinha talks about a few mental health issues. Dr. Chatterjee, who used to be a GP in Trafford, really famous for Doctor in the House. He's got a couple of books, but one in particular, The Stress Solution, well worth getting hold of and taking a look at, or even catching him on his podcasts. I didn't mention stress. We just I didn't want to, but I thought I'd have to put something in. But we just do it to ourselves, don't we? I get that life, there's life pressures, and that's normal. But generally, my opinion, and obviously I'm open for criticism, because I possibly that I'm wrong, but my opinion is that generally Asians were just a people of really high expectations in everything, like really high expectations. We just don't let people be, and it's really important to let people be without judging them or having this expectation of whatever. So ask yourself, do I take on too much? Are my expectations too high with myself or people around me? What's my orientation in life? Is my driver in life just to have more, or to be seen to have more, or to expand my mini empire? Is that and I miss out on everything on life? And why are we stressing about our great obviously I'm exaggerating, great grandchildren that I'm worried about them, so I'm working my socks off to make sure that they can have a house? I mean, these things you've got to think about. That what am I doing? Am I stressing myself out unnecessarily outside of normal life pressures, which I'm not negating? Because remember, 10% of stress is actually what happened, and 90% is actually the thoughts behind it. But if you go back to that inside out theory, that is the decisions you make when you're in that stressful period. It's decisions you make, not the actual condition that you meet. So just ask yourself, when you're in that stressful situation, just stop and say, okay, how can I be solution focused? How am I going to get myself out of this? What steps am I going to take? You'll find it far less stressful. And remember, this is really important. Again, it's about expectations. We can break our own hearts just through expectations. Key is, one of my friends who's a brilliant scholar from down south, he said to me once, he said, if you have no expectations from anybody, and he meant that, absolutely anybody, have no expectations with anybody, whether it's your parents, your children, your spouse, your friends, your colleagues at work, your neighbor, no one, have no expectations from anyone, you'll have no heartbreak. And he's right. He's absolutely right. So slow down, keep calm, be positive, take it easy on yourself, unplug from devices, go and enjoy the world, have fun, breathe. Okay, learn to breathe. We don't know how to breathe, or most of us are just breathless because we don't know how to breathe. Look at breathing techniques with relaxation techniques. And go outside. There's a beautiful world out there. Just go. Obviously, stay within social distancing measures. Smile. Okay, but learn to smile. One of the Prophet's name was Bahak, the one who constantly smiled. Meditate. Okay, there's mindfulness. Take a look at that. We call it muraqabah, being vigilant. And one way of doing it, which I think is neutral for any Muslim, regardless of your background and your who you follow and so forth, is just maybe once a day, either in the morning or in the evening, 5 minutes. Everybody's got 5 minutes. Turn everything off, your TV, laptop, phone, etc. Turn everything off and just count your blessings. Just sit there for 5 minutes and just keep counting, and just count your blessings. And what you'll find is that you'll find things to be happy about and smile about and be really, really joyful about. That's one strategy. And remember, life is about fulfillment. Okay, it's more about fulfillment than achievement. A lot of people can achieve a lot of things. They can become a doctor or a lawyer, or they can achieve their goals in life, or they can achieve, they can become a millionaire, or they can have a wonderful business, or all these things that are really big in Asian culture. I'm not saying these things are in itself are things that are necessarily good or great. It's from a cultural point of view, these are the things that we see achievement in. But it's about being fulfilled, because there's plenty of people out there who are miserable, high achievers but miserable, and we see them in our clinics. Okay, and it's about And I'll quote, there's a lady called Rachel Macy Stafford who wrote a wonderful book called Hands-Free Life, The 9 Habits for Overcoming Distraction, Living Better and Living More. Really good read. I should have put it on earlier. But one thing she talks about is, quote, keeping track of life, so, fulfillment, is much more than going through the motions of putting down the phone, burning the to-do list, and letting go of perfection. It's something deep, lasting, permanent. It's a conscious decision. So remember that word again. Okay, so experts always use this word, decision. It's a choice. It's a conscious decision to focus on what really matters when a sea of insignificance tries to pull you away. Like I said earlier, we stress ourselves out on things that just don't matter. Remember, if you have a healthy self, ultimately you heal thyself. Okay, so remember, like at the beginning, it starts with you. You take control. Finally, I know I'm running out of time, Dr. Tariq and Muhammad Rafiq, but if I may, we can't, as Muslims, we cannot deny this fact. Okay, that yes, depression, anxiety, or suffering from mental health is not a sign of weak iman at all, but there's always room to strengthen faith, and no one can deny that. There's always room to strengthen faith, always. Once there's a narration of a Sahabi, Abu Umama. He was sat in the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ in Medina Munawwara, and he had his knees up and his hands were around his knees and his head was down. Imagine that position, sat on the floor. And the Prophet ﷺ came into the masjid and he said to Abu Umama, he said to him, "Ma ajlasaka fi masjidi fi ghayri waqti salah." What's made you come and sit in my masjid when it's not even time for salah? Or kama qal, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so Abu Umama said to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Humumun ghalabatni wa duyunun rakabatni." He said, my sadness has just overcome me. I'm just drowning in debt. So the Prophet ﷺ said to him, أَوَلَا أَدُلُّكَ إِلَى كَلِمَةٍ إِذَا قُلْتَهُنَّ أَذْهَبَ اللَّهُ هَمَّكْ وَقَضَى دَيْنَكَ. Should I direct you to a couple of words that if you were to say it, Allah will remove your sadness and see to your debts? And so Abu Umama said, Bala, of course, Ya Rasulullah, tell me. So the Prophet ﷺ said to him, قُلْ اللهم إني أعوذ بك من الهم والحزن والعجز والكسل والجبن والبخل من غلبة الدين وقهر الرجال. He said to him, say, اللهم إني أعوذ بك من الهم والحزن. Allah, I seek refuge with you from worry and sadness. والعجز والكسل, from anxiety and inertia, laziness. والجبن والبخل, from cowardness and miserliness. ومن غلبة الدين وقهر الرجال, and from being overburdened with debt or overpowered by people. And Abu Umama said, فَقُلْتُهُنَّ, I said these words, فَأَذْهَبَ اللَّهُ هَمَّكْ وَقَضَى دَيْنَكَ, and Allah removed my worries and saw to my debts. Okay, so this is how you strengthen your faith. What I'm trying to say to you is that you follow the way of the Rasul, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's how you strengthen your faith with these things. That's how faith is strengthened. So take a look at the Prophet. If there's anybody on this planet who went through difficulty, it was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How did he respond? He connected, and he taught the Sahaba, and he taught you and I how to connect to Allah, because only Allah can get you through these difficulties. Nothing and no one else has the power to do it. If you want to have this change from within, it starts from begging Allah for enabling grace, for tawfiq. Because nothing happens without Allah's tawfiq. In fact, in the Quran, in Surah Ma'arij, there's a famous story of one of our great scholars of the past, Shaykh Abul Hasan al-Shadili, rahimahullah, that some scholars came to him, and they came to criticize him and to lay into him. And he could see that this is, they came with this sort of an intention. So before they even got into a conversation, he asked them, have you guys prayed? And they said, yes, we prayed our salah. And then he said to them, but are you sure you've prayed a proper prayer? And the scholars said, look, we're scholars. If we don't know how to pray, who knows how to pray? And so the Imam Shadli, he said to them, rahimahullah, he said, no, have you prayed a prayer where إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ خُلِقَ هَلُوعًا إِذَا مَسَّهُ الشَّرُّ جَزُوعًا وَإِذَا مَسَّهُ الْخَيْرُ مَنُوعًا إِلَّا الْمُصَلِّينَ? Have you prayed a prayer where To the nearest meaning, these verses mean that indeed human beings have been created in an anxious state. That when difficulty befalls them, to the nearest meaning, when difficulty befalls them, they become hyper anxious. Okay, but وَإِذَا مَسَّهُ الْخَيْرُ مَنُوعًا, when good comes to them, they become stingy and withhold, except those إِلَّا الْمُصَلِّينَ, those who pray. الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ دَائِمُونَ, those who are persistent with their ritual prayers. That's the 5 daily salah. And so what does that tell you? What does that actually tell? It tells you that those who are actually consistent in their prayer, especially their 5 daily prayers, they won't be in that state. And that's where strengthening faith comes in. One of the things our Prophet ﷺ advised, that if whoever says this in the evening, رَضِيتُ بِاللَّهِ رَبًّا وَبِالْإِسْلَامِ دِينًا وَبِمُحَمَّدٍ نَبِيًّا, you can see the English there, it's حَقٌّ عَلَى اللَّهِ, that it's a duty upon Allah to please him or her who says this. So these are tools that these are tools that you have access to create that inner sense of happiness and joy. Inshallah, I'll stop there. So just final thoughts. Change is possible. Don't say that you can't change or I can't change. Highly possible to change. Remember, why is more important than how. If you figure out why, and essentially it's to have optimal health, and consistency is the key, and nothing occurs without divine providence, tawfiq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, having that grace from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And like every single webinar, we've talked about how important this hadith of the Prophet is, that 2 blessings that most people are just, they don't take care of, and that's their health and free time. So that's the last of the 3. I hope they've been beneficial for you, and it brings change and good health to you, inshallah. Jazakallah khair for your time. We'll take questions if anybody has any.